Awesome. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. So when Greg asked me to speak about ways of working and what it means in this new context, and thank you, Greg, for bringing in this idea of the new normal, which we've heard quite a bit. And I think it's a very important place to start here because the reality is things have changed and it is highly likely they will not be the same. And similarly, our ways of work have to meet that demand, have to meet that change. The way we used to manage offline is not the same we should manage online. There's a new context, and that context means that everything is different. So we can't transpose the old world onto the new. We can't take our approach to leading individuals and managing them to achieve incredible things, whether it's performance or innovation, in the same way. Yes, the same tools and the same skills are required, but in a way, one has to switch some lower and some higher on the frequencies. So we can't take it as it is and transform it. One of the critical challenges that we face in this new world of work is that we can't see. We can't see the people that we are dealing with. And so in the old world, you'd be able to pop into your office or meet with your team physically, and you'd see the eye rolls, and you'd know if somebody was disengaged. You'd get a sense of, that guy or girl who's quickly hiding Facebook as you walk in. There's almost something in the air that you can sense in a physical space, where online it becomes really difficult. And so it almost feels everyone is within arm's reach. And I think that's what we're seeing with regards to the desire to see video and this idea of high tech needs to meet the high touch. And so the managers of today, what they need to deal with is, are they going to be able to read the nuance? And what's important is that the human centristic element of leadership has become center stage. The exciting part is it's met with what we will call outcomes-based work. For the first time ever, a manager is able to say, what I need from you is output. I can move away from measuring activities and say, your role is to create value.
Yeah, Oran, you're going to see me get very excited here and give you a hand clap for that.
And please butt in because I get very excited myself.
No, I'm going to give you a hand clap for that because I think for the first time, our managers are going to be required to call on a different skill set, right? So what made you a hard and productive manager is now going to make you a productive manager, but you're also going to be able to pull on some of your empathy as you go into the space. So the human-centric manager is also going to have a space to thrive in this new world of work.
100%. And so at least we can become outcomes driven and we can think about things through an outcomes and a value-based approach. What we need to move away from is this idea of measuring activity. In order to meet that type of leadership, you can't meet it in the old way and try to boss people into outcomes. The critical shift here is that the challenges of this space is you cannot see, you have an inability to observe the body language. There's a lack of trust in the sense of you don't know how people are going to show up. And so there's a sense of uncertainty. So what that means is core to your capability as a leader and as a manager is developing the ability for feedback loops. So you need data. You need human-centered data that comes from the nuance of connection, and you need hard-coded data to start to give you a full view of answering these three questions. And the new manager needs to have this at center stage. The first question that the manager needs to answer is, what's going on? What is actually happening in my environment? What's happening with my people? Who is passive? Who's passive aggressive? Who is disengaged? So the first port of call is to answer what's going on. And to do that often and clearly and quickly. And that is both nuanced data around human-centristic realities of culture and teamwork, as well as data that tells you a story about what does that mean? What are the patterns we can gain from it? And then in this ever-evolving context, what should we do about it? And how do we move quickly? How do we transform what's happening quickly? Because I can tell you guys, in this environment, when somebody disengages, it spirals out fast. And so the manager needs to augment their capabilities, their facilitation capabilities, more than ever before. They are the HR custodian. They are the coach. And so those nice skills that were nice to have in the other environment could potentially be hazardous if you don't have them in remote work environments. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So clear to this, the most important thing is contracting. And so realize that the minute you've gone remote, you should be recontracting with your teams around what output looks like. The sort of the blurred lines don't work very well offline, online.
Yeah.
So you have to establish clear expectations. And Natasha, do you want to bring anything in on that?
So in terms of just how you'd manage those clear expectations, Greg, I think you're going to have to be very explicit, Oran, you're going to be explicit about the behavioral expectation as well, right? So there's going to be some learning to be done on what it means to be good at your job and how it is you do your job, how it is you show up for work every day, what it is that behavior looks like when you are serving a customer physically, because for some of us, our teams are still going to be on a shop floor or in an office while we're managing them remotely in some cases as well, which brings an added dimension to it and a manager's ability to dial up the different ways of managing in those complex environments. So being explicit about your expectations, not only the technical, but also the behavioral expectations as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So establishing these clear expectations. So in a way, managers and leaders have to understand that they must define what good behavior looks like. They must get very clear about what good quality outcomes look like of a team member. And so an interesting piece of information is 81% of people consider poor communication and inappropriate information sharing to have a great influence negatively on performance in remote teams. So communicating effectively as a manager is going to be key. You will be misconstrued. You will be misinterpreted. And so your job is to over-communicate your intentions and your why. So I'm not talking Simon Sinek why necessarily, but I'm talking about why are you taking this action and why are you giving me this task? So that communication becomes almost the lifeline and the lifeblood that connects. So as we become more outcomes driven, we have to develop our ability for connection, communication, and trust. Fantastic. So just to recap a little bit, you have to get very clear about what will working hours look like. It's a very tricky conversation because some schools of thought say, you know what, it's 8 to 5, that's what we agreed, this is how we're going to run it. Others say, don't even expect to see me, I'll do my work at 10 p.m. because my child is at home. And so specifically in a COVID nuanced environment, remote team management becomes quite difficult. And so as a team, you need to have these honest conversations and agree so you understand the constraints and the limitations. How will we keep each other updated? On what communication platform will we keep each other connected? Because the worst is when you've got, I know we're all feeling it, you've got WhatsApp, you've got Zoom, Skype, and Slack all going.
Trello, all of them working.
Exactly. And so the productivity is about channeled communication and clarity. So what would you like to try that you haven't tried is the opportunity also in this environment. Okay, awesome. So it's important, just before we jump into this, I just want to say that the kinds of things you're looking for as a leader and a manager is the following. You need to start becoming aware and support individuals to pitch up and participate. You need to understand that actually for some people, especially the introverts, this becomes more difficult because they have to come out of their skin even more. So pitch up and participate is a critical behavior that you have to drive in your teams. Another is around starting to bring awareness to planning and producing, and almost naming that as an outcome of the role. So how do they go about working with others to plan? What documentation do they use? And also how they actually output the results. Third is around sharing and communication. So are they showing up in the way that they're sharing where they're at, what's going on for them? Are they showing up in the stand-ups? Are they there in the rhythms that you have built in the design of your ways of work? And finally, are you actually holding people accountable to the way that they champion, the way that they support others in the way that they're showing up? Are they exuding the culture? Because that's the hardest thing, let's face it. Yeah. Somehow culture is one of those things when you step into a working environment, you're like, okay, I think everyone's being collaborative today. I think there's a sense of openness. And so when you start to shape a culture, it's easy physically. And this is a core of the work that we do at Genius Works around behavior solution design. So the critical thing is, how do you do that online? When you bring in technology and when you bring in data, how do you start to do that online? So build some team norms, have conversations at team and individual levels, and build those rhythms. Maybe create a culture retrospective. Think about, are you creating spaces where you're reflecting on how each individual is showing up and how team members are showing up? Agree on how to track each other's availability and actually contract the ways of work.
Oran, can you talk a little bit more about managing introverts? It's something that hasn't come up in our earlier discussions, but I think it's an important point because the way introverts respond to certain environments can be quite different from extroverts.
Sure. Yeah. So a really nice practice is it becomes difficult, for example, in a stand-up. So find tools that allow you to write, to allow team members to write what they've committed to yesterday, what they're going to do today, and what obstacles they face. And writing it down really helps because it makes it tangible. And even if the team member is reading off what they've written, there's a sense of being able to put their voice into the room. And find digital tools, and we'll talk about digital tools in a second, that allow for bottom-up knowledge creation. So allow for the voices on the ground, not only, oh, am I feeling engaged from a level of 1 to 10, but also to tell the story of what's happening operationally that serves or sabotages the organization. That becomes even harder online. And so businesses and managers have to step up in a completely different way to the challenge of how they create the voices and create platforms for the voices of their team members. Great. Natasha, would you like to jump in here for a sec?
Yeah, so I think just with regards to establishing cultures or developing cultures, typically in a physical work environment, and up to this point, we've really managed people on the end product. So tell me, what is the goal? I don't want to know how you got there. And one of the things we're going to have to start building is a work in progress reporting culture. So tell me where you're at right now. What do you think your next steps are going to be? And what do you think you didn't do so good at in the last step that you did? So when that becomes part of your way of working, it's easier even for your introvert to write down the things that, oh, I did say I was going to commit to this, but I didn't get to it yesterday. And it's also an easy way for, as a manager, for you to pick up on those performance improvement patterns that you need to get to. Also, you get to pick up on what is it that your team needs to learn to do next.
Awesome, absolutely. And with that, use every opportunity that you can. Let's go back to the previous slide, sorry. Use every opportunity to get feedback, engage your people. Start to build the data that tells the story culturally, learning and skills gap wise, as well as performance. And see how you're able to start integrating that using technology. So on the job flow becomes real. So I think, let's be frank, the trends are showing that on the job flow has an impact on productivity and effectiveness more than assessing somebody every 3 months or 6 months, where I can't remember what I ate for breakfast. So on the job flow becomes even more relevant in this environment. How are people reflecting on themselves? How are they reflecting on their team members, and how are you linking all of those things together?
And Oran, can you talk about how we, what this looks like digitally?
Sure, absolutely. So an example is we have a platform called Gwork that does people management remotely. If we can go to the next screen. And there's some nice examples there. So first of all, find ways to create a pulse. You don't need to send it every week, at the end of every week. You can do something small every day that adds up to a picture that allows you to see trends of how people are showing up. So try and do a behavior pulse or culture pulse, even once a day with one question, and rank it over a week and see the impact of actions. Start to chronicle, for example, you can see on our module here around what I committed to completing from the day before. So you can start to see if people are showing up in the way that they have said that they would with regards to accountability. And as a leader, support them and coach them on that. And data becomes critical to that, because then you can feed that back.
Oran, can I jump in there quickly?
Sure,
can I just jump in before you go on? So just in terms of managing in the online and in what I'm going to call for now the offline scenarios, is that you should actually use a similar structure when you're engaging in an informal way with your team in the office. And you start to build, so whether you are an organization that has access to the digital tools, these are great tools for you to actually build your rhythm around how it is you manage people in this new world of working. So when they transition out of the office into a remote environment, which may well be the case sometimes, it's not a brand new way of working for them.
Absolutely. And if you do have a team that is partly remote and part physical, you have to think about how do you integrate those worlds so that you've got one single view as a manager on how your people are showing up. Next slide. Another critical element is how are you using, so I, as a manager, can't see my team all the time. And if I'm a good manager, I'm not on every call that they're having with their teammates. So how do you create spaces where peer feedback can be given? And how does that actually link to the performance of how an individual shows up? So create visibility around teams so that they can start hold each other accountable and build the culture that you're so after. And then another critical element is around how do you start to build a holistic picture? So this is, for example, our manager view. And so how do you build the relationship between individual team performance? How do you start to see those skills gap and start to find patterns that tell you a story? Oh, so this week it seems like, product knowledge is a bit of a tricky one in our environment. Oh, these are the courses that are being recommended from peer to peer. Or these are the insights, operational insights that have been escalated around our business objectives. And start to build a full picture that takes what we like to call the visible and invisible parts of running a successful team into consideration. Perfect. So just to wrap up on the ways of work side, I think there's a couple of critical things to think about. Is as a manager, you need to build your facilitative abilities. And that means ask questions, learn to listen more. And I know this stuff sounds familiar because you've heard it in those leadership programs, but it's up the ante when it comes to remote work. And also learn to actually celebrate your team members. Learn to celebrate the kind of behavior that you're after. And do that in public forums. Do that in your retrospective, your stand-ups, etc. Create spaces also for team members to celebrate each other. And that's both digitally as well as through the meetings. Share, communicate a lot. If you think you're communicating enough, you're not. Because it is so easy to misinterpret what needs to be done in a digital environment, in a remote environment. Sure. And share accomplishments. So in other words, don't only share the stuff that must be done, but also share the things that are being done. So that's not necessarily giving kudos to somebody else, but how to create spaces to celebrate. Because let's face it, everyone is stressed in this environment. And so a little bit of good news goes a long way. Connect, find ways to understand who people are and how they're feeling. Because again, as a manager, your coaching hat becomes so much more prevalent in this environment. You should be playing the role of empowering somebody to step up and step away from micromanaging. And then finally, build humanness. So use video. You can see my eyebrows popping up and down, and that I'm a very passionate guy. That has an impact on understanding who I am. Yeah. Your role as a manager is, are you reading your people? Are you understanding how they connect to each other and to you?